sure everything is correct. So it's been a process, but we're getting there, and we're almost to the end of, I think it's exactly the database. We went back to the old database called Muni Mooring. That has all the current information as of now. Well, almost.
So
if we know someone who's good at software, local
so that's
person-
working now, that's all
I actually,
updated?
yeah, except for Steve and I actually like this old software now from my billing standpoint. I've had to really dig into it and learn a lot about it. Unfortunately for he and I, it is so old that, like he said, if he needs to flag somebody or somebody put a bigger boat on, and I don't, that's a different price also. So I don't get that information, you know, it's just, we want something like that, but that he can click on something down in the harbor and say, okay, so-and-so, you know, swapped with so-and-so or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, and it's an old software on a fairly old Dell laptop, and I have it saved and stuff, but I'm like, God, if this craps out. So I would also love it if we have the newer stuff for, I don't know, if I'm driving,
Phone, yeah.
God forbid I take a day off in the summer, and I'm driving to Connecticut, and Ron calls me and says, hey, where did my moorings, or where's whoever's mooring? I can say, oh, hold on, and I can get it right up on my phone, where I can't now, and say, oh, here's the light launcher.
Or you'll get a ticket if you do that while you're driving.
Yeah, that's right. But so really, if we can get together and find out who does software and tell them what we want, and see, and maybe not reinvent the wheel, but get a new car anyway, and that'd be great. That'd be a great project for this.
So there's a management from your end is all the statistical
Right.
information.
Right.
The management from your end is actual location with identification on a
Ownership.
chart,
That launch.
because you need to be able to actually physically go find it.
And all I have is, you click on my thing and I have a box that says, here's the boat size and name, here's the owner, here's their telephone number, here's their inspector, here's the gear. That's all I have in my little box. You get a little white box comes up on any of my points on my thing. Maeve. Name your boat, Maeve?
On the,
Right, yeah, maybe.
on the screen?
Well, if I right click on a little dot that says whatever your number is, boom, a little white box comes up with the information box that I type. And I can change it anytime. It's simple. Ron Hawkins, Maeve, 50 feet, size block. Here's his inspector. Here's your emergency contact. That's all I have. That's all I want. I don't need anything else.
So you have that.
I have that already. Now the idea is to make it so that I can talk to Liz,
Right.
and Liz can say, oh, Ron Hawkins changed the name of his boat. It's Silly Cucumber now. It's not Maeve. And so, oh, I didn't know that. So if she types in, it could go in. That's the update that we want her to be able to put in. If I move Ron's mooring a little bit, then she gets it the next time it talks. That was the idea of this.
He doesn't have all the information I have, and I don't have all the information he has.
Yeah.
So even when the mooring inspectors bring me their inspections, and I put them in under everybody's thing, and what, their recommendations, whatever, I have all that. He doesn't have
I would
that.
love to have that. As soon
So
as it
that
happens.
would be something, if you
Love to
could
have
click
it.
on
Is that
it.
mooring? I want to put my boat on that. Is that inspected? Hold on.
Exactly.
Yep. I
So
gotta go talk to her before I.
if you were to print out the information that you have, how big a document would that be?
It's not too big, but this is where this old software gets a little clunky. Steve wants sometimes which he needs, some really detailed reports, and this software, it won't do it.
Yeah.
He just wanted some basic, phone numbers. He wanted a list of moorings with phone numbers. The other issue, which that was clerical, over the years, then I'm working on putting back in, is the boat owner would go in and all their information, phone numbers. Sometimes, a lot of times, the phone numbers weren't even put into the database back then. So that's what I've been refreshing and putting in so that he can have these reports. But
Well, I guess what I'm getting at is, is it just as simple as like going through all the data and updating it all and making sure it's correct and then,
that's what I've been
and
doing,
then
but that's
print it out
Yeah.
and give Steve a notebook and he's got it down there in the
what
office?
we're hoping for.
Well,
If they can develop these reports, sometimes that's what I mean is the software's so old, I'll call them and say, I need to develop this report just to give me all the information on this mooring holder. And he can't do it. He says he can't do it.
Well, and it's a fluid situation. You print it out, and then 6 months later,
It's changed,
Mm-hmm.
or,
Like a
yeah.
month later, somebody,
it has to be.
moorings change hands all the
It's
time.
something you can
Yeah.
update.
But that's why you
Being
need a
updated.
database. that-
Correct,
Yeah.
right.
We're on the phone all the time, even this time of year, and this is the time of year where I don't wanna be working on mooring fields, because we've got,
Right.
everything else is
Yeah,
going
that's
on,
the,
you know?
yeah.
Any of it that I do,
Get your
every
hands
wait list
full.
Yeah.
changes daily.
So that'd be a great,
All right.
you know,
Could that be like the first item on this, the first step of this mooring plan, you know, this,
You want to
mooring
prioritize
management?
that?
well,
Yeah.
you know, if we could start looking at where we could look at someone who wants to create this software that we're talking about. A local person would be like, I'll sit down, I'll do this. Someone who can do it. We could pay them. Audra says we've got some money. And I think it'd be great I'd like to be involved with that. And actually say, here's what we want, here's
You
exactly.
have to be involved in that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, here's what we need. Here's what we want to be able to do.
But that's reinventing the wheel. I mean, there's gotta be some software out there that,
If there's software that someone could take and
Works
say,
well.
I'm gonna take the software and add to it, then that's great.
yeah.
I don't know.
Probably is the software, but you've got to put the information in.
Mhm. The information has to be correct, you're right, going into it, that's where I'm at right now.
Now, that's gonna be a whole,
That's
Yeah,
not,
but-
that's not a
Right
whole
there.
lot of information, though. I mean, consider, you got,
Well-
400 moorings, it's not like you're,
400
putting together
moorings,
Amazon's database,
No.
Yeah.
no, but I mean, it's gonna take one person,
or more, yeah.
probably 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah, it'll take time, yeah, but,
Yeah,
Full time. To enter all the information and,
except you have software that has data already in it,
right,
you could probably maybe get an extract from that to upload.
That's where the geek comes in.
Yeah, then you
exactly.
need The new app has to be able to read the old app.
Yep.
you know, 'cause
right.
All right, so, any volunteers to study that issue?
I have a strong interest in aspects of it.
Mhm.
I will not profess in any way to be an expert, but I'm certainly happy to talk to people.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's all we need, someone to help point us in the right direction, yeah.
I can help you a little, I've got some expertise, I don't want to volunteer for everything, that's my
Yeah, right.
problem, but
Yeah.
I've got expertise in database design and stuff like that.
I
Yeah.
think it would be critical.
So,
And,
yeah,
So I can work with you if you want.
Well, you at least know, you would know if we were able to find somebody who either volunteers or gets paid to make the connection between the two sources of information and makes it so they can talk to each other, you would know whether they know what they're talking about.
Yeah, and I think that there's more than two sources of information you've been talking about, there's several, but,
yep. My database would be easy. Here's all my points, and you can unload them all. I can put them on a chip and give them all to you right now. All the data. Here's mooring 226, and here's where it is.
and the lat one.
That's all I need to do. Then they have to connect it and say, oh, well, her 226 is Mr. Smith, and here's his
Right.
phone. And
Yeah.
boom, there it is.
There's your key,
It
right.
should not be that hard to do.
Mooring numbers are key.
Yeah.
Just a functional question here. Do you rely on the mooring inspectors for the lat launch positions?
No. No, the only time I would rely on that is once in a blue moon, they'll come to me and say, I'll look at them and we'll come up real quick and say, yeah, they're too close. Someone just said these boats are too close. And I'll say to either Adam Scott or Brad or Rob, okay, go ahead and move it right there. See that spot right there? It's about 20 feet. They're like, okay, they'll move it. I'll watch them move it. And I'll say, when you get a chance, I'm gonna go into my office, and when you get a chance, give me that new lat launch. And they'll give it to me, and I'll be on my computer, and I'll literally say, I'll drag it to the new spot, and when I'm dragging it, they'll show, here's my lat launch. I'll put it, and I'll say, yeah, that's where I told them to put it. And there it is. That's the only time I rely on them, But it's usually me with them, I just don't have the exact numbers until they give it to me.
But if, well, anyway,
So you do have, on your computer, you do have the Latin lawn?
Yep.
Of
Every morning,
every morning?
yep. And every,
yeah, it's like, he's got data, she's got data, we need integration.
I can tell you mine's not correct.
well, we should go out and we should make it correct. All that is
Yeah.
going out and saying, oh, it looks like it's been moved, and I can get that, I would say I'm 95% of what moorings, because every spring I try to go out and, but yeah, there's not gonna, you said it's moving,
Okay.
it's moving.
So, you two are on that? Study that. Next is review of rates and late fees. We've got a rate schedule. It's a study of other harbors, what they charge, what looks fair, what doesn't look fair, and where we're at.
Also, in the ordinance, it describes that the select board in November of each year shall establish a schedule of user fees for town facilities.
Yes.
So that work then would need to be completed by
What-
that time.
Yeah, by, what was the date?
It says November here of each year. It says by its last meeting in November shall establish a schedule of user fees for town facilities for the harbor. I noticed that this year's schedule says that the select board approved it in January. But at any rate, this is what the ordinance describes, and we would have to provide our input
By
prior to
November.
that.
Yes.
So we should have some kind of date on that task.
Yep. And on that task, I mean, if you review the fees, the question I've had is, what's that zone called for the floats?
Federal project zone?
Federal Project Zone regulates the inner harbor floats. It says you have to charge everybody, resident or non-resident, the same fees. Everything I've heard about that has all been verbal. I haven't found that in writing, and I'd like to see it and understand it, you know? And you know that it's an accurate statement. I've researched it a bit, so, you know, I've got rates for several different main harbors. I think I can work on this one. My concern there is, if you've got, here's an example, if you've got a 38-foot boat and you're a non-resident of Camden, it is cheaper for you to lay on a float than it is on a mooring. So that's skewed there. The floats are highly desirable, they're the best spot in the harbor, and I think they're the best bargain going. So I think there's gonna be some real corrections there. So.
And what's the purpose of the rates? Is it cost reimbursement? Is it town income? I mean,
Town
'cause-
income.
And are we charged to try to maximize town income to offset other things? I mean, do we
No,
have
I think
any?
I think it's to be fair across the board, you know, and it's to, you know, it's to, I mean, if you're a resident of the town of Camden, there should be no reason why you can't have a mooring in Camden Harbor,
Right.
you know?
That was my question. Is there any priority for residents to get moorings versus non-residents, or?
There is a priority in a sense. Again, the Army Corps says that if a municipality has more applicants than there are moorings, then you have to have a waiting list. If the waiting list has to have a certain percentage to it. So let's say if I go,
okay.
it's actually 15%. If all of a sudden, someone who is a non-resident comes in and says, oh, I'm a non-resident, and I don't think you've got 15% non-residents right now. You've got less than 15% of non-residents, non-commercial, and that's what I am. And if I check it, we usually do once in a while. I haven't in a while, but usually because we're so far away from not being in conformity. And I'd say, oh, you're right. You know, I don't have 50% non-residents, so I move them to the top of the list. They get a spot. Same with, so this is, that's same with, commercial. If I don't have 50% resident commercial, Toby Winkelhofer, when he first came in 18 years ago, he was like, oh, I really want, I know the waiting list is so long, but I'd like a spot. He was at that point, he was a non-resident commercial. I didn't have 15% of that, so I had to offer a mooring. So that's the only way the Army Corps
Okay.
does that.
And that is, it's up to the applicant to prove.
Well, to prove that they're a non-resident.
Or request.
They could request and
But-
say,
well-
what is it? And I can, and I'd say, oh, here it is, because the computer tells us that pretty quick.
Percentages?
Percentage.
Yeah.
Well, we have to work it out. They'll say, here's how many non-resident, here's how many resident.
Yeah.
You can work it out pretty quick.
Okay.
This federal requirement is mandatory, or is that in order to qualify for federal funding for dredging and?
The Army Corps allows a local municipality, to take over state waters and say, you use it as you want. Go ahead, Camden, use it as you want. But you gotta follow a couple rules if we're gonna let you use this, just for, the Army Corps is not getting any money, they're not getting any fees, we are. And we're allowed to do that. We can charge whatever we want for fees. But one of the stipulations, Ron, is that there are a few rules that we have to follow.
But my question is that if you don't follow the rules, then you don't qualify for federal funding.
That, and I think Army Corps could come in and say, we're not gonna let you use this area anymore. Like, we're not gonna let you put any permits in.
That's what we need to research, all right? Because it's all word of mouth that's the way it is so far.
My understanding was that the ordinances were created in the first place because it was a Army Corps federal requirement in order to qualify for federal funding for monies for dredging and launching ramp construction and engineering costs and all of that.
Makes sense.
That's my impression. I mean, that's,
And, a long time ago, we went, once Camden said, this is basically a harbor we want to use, then they went to the Army Corps and said, well, we want to start putting moorings in this area. Okay. So basically, we're going to have a south mooring field and north mooring field. You have to keep a channel, and they're the ones that directed the town to do that, and you've got to keep that channel. And the inner harbor, we had to go to them and say, can we have permission to have permitted moorings here in a federal navigable waterway, because that's what the entire inner harbor is. So they would say, sure, we give them a thing, they have a picture. The Army Corps,
5 feet.
Army Corps goes up, they're gonna say, oh, here's how many mooring floats they have, because we've issued them, or the okay to do that. If we wanted to add another mooring, inner harbor float, we'd actually have to go call Jay Clement and say, hey, in fact, I did 8 years ago when we put the smaller one in for Chris Richmond. We said, we can fit another small one in here if it's a smaller boat, where that the two columns wedged in, remember that, Ben?
Yeah.
So, yeah. I don't know, I found throughout the years when I first took over, it was like, oh, I got an Army Corps, can I do this? And they're kind of like, go ahead, like, they don't really care. But you definitely kind of have to keep them in the loop.
I guess my question,
Steve?
Army, Jay Clement, yeah, I mean, I have a phone contact that can, yeah, if you want it.
but my question about rates is, when I was sitting on the budget committee, it was always commendable that the harbor was a source of income for the town. It was appreciated, but, and that's great, but I just wonder, I think there needs to, it shouldn't be just making money because it has the capacity to make money.
Oh, no.
And
Nope.
I think it lets other departments off the hook on some level, and I don't want to get into that, but I just also think we need to not be thinking about it as income, make sure it covers its way and then is fair, and then in much the same, that was I remember just sitting there for 3 years kind of going, wow, and it was like a cow, you just keep milking it. It's like, well,
Oh, I
that's
agree.
not right.
Yeah, right.
And I really want us to reflect, like, what does it cost to run a good harbor? How can we be fair to the residents and the users? And then set things
And I think that's the
I
same
think-
with the Snowball, that was what,
Yeah.
that was the shift that happened this year, and it will continue to happen, I think, is that they're trying to make it, for certainly cover its costs first and foremost, but then also be a benefit for Camden residents, and then for non-residents, which is why they implemented those ski-free days, you know, all that jazz.
I think what you're saying is covered in here when they say best public use or the most public use of the harbor as possible. We don't want to be, I think that should prevent usurious or whatever.
And then we shouldn't necessarily raise the rates every year just because we can, or whatever.
Exactly.
you know.
No, but, you know, it's also look at what other harbors charge.
Exactly, yeah.
And, you know, where are we? And, you know, to say that a mooring out in the harbor is actually more expensive than a float in the inner harbor, how is that fair and balanced?
Exactly.
You know, and so those are the kind of things that we need to look
Absolutely,
at.
yeah.
You know, does that mean we reduce the rates in the outer harbor? Or increase the rates in the inner harbor? And, you know, that's,
No, I think that's good.
There's an interesting requirement in the ordinances that in order to put your name on the list for an inner harbor float, you have to have already acquired
a mooring.
a mooring in the outer harbor.
yes.
So those people end up with two elements. They end up with a float in the inner harbor. Well, plus it postpones the time that you can put your name on the list. You're waiting for X number of years for a Camden, for a mooring in the outer harbor. That's time you're missing out on getting on the inner harbor float list.
Yeah.
And then what happens when now you've got one person who has an inner harbor float and an outer harbor mooring.
Well, and that's something we ought to address too and look at, you know,
Before I bring it
you
up.
can't have, you can't have, I mean, why have both? You know, what that's doing
What do you
is,
mean, why have both?
well,
What
if you
got-
have
what if
one
you got
boat,
two boats? and
Well-
you-
Yeah, but if-
You've got on the waiting list, you've waited on the waiting list, you've done what you're supposed to do.
yes, yes, but I'm saying if you have one boat,
Well, obviously, if you have one boat, you shouldn't have two moorings.
right,
And that, we have that already in place, where you have to have your boat on your mooring. And if they say to Liz, Liz is gonna say, well, you got your boat that you've registered and you paid excise tax, that goes on your inner harbor float, what are you putting on your mooring? Oh, I'm gonna swap the boat back and forth. Liz is gonna say,
Yeah.
And yet the
Okay,
ordinance
so
is
that's
saying you
in
have to
It's
have
already in
both.
place.
Yeah, but the ordinance requires that you have both right up to the day that you are provided with a float. I mean,
So then you
Yeah,
can turn
once-
down the one or the other.
then you have to abandon your mooring in the outer harbor.
Unless you get another boat
Right.
and say,
And use it, not as a dummy
I
boat,
think
yeah.
we need to review, because I keep coming back to Exhibit A, which is Phyllis Young, demented as all day long. When I got here, and she literally got approved for an inner harbor finger float, I found out as well, when I went to pay for her boat to be on the finger float, that she was also, had been approved for a mooring, but she kept saying, I don't need it, because she, and I was like, Mother, you don't even have a boat, you don't even have a mind, and you've been paying for both. But clearly, somewhere along the line, because she'd been on that list for 6 or 7 years, someone had said, you need to get on the mooring thing, and then she got approved for the mooring eventually, and then, of course, she didn't need it, and she said, oh, I keep turning it. So we just,
so.
both of them gone, but clearly, somewhere along the line, the rule had been interpreted for her, and then it was a nonsense.
Yeah,
And it sounds like it's a
exactly.
nonsense for anyone who
There's-
only ever is only intending to have one boat, ever.
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge,
Well, I think the idea is that you give up your mooring because you've got your more desirable float in the harbor.
but the point
But
is that
That
if
doesn't
really
happen.
all you wanted is a float,
Does it
why do you
happen?
have to
Do
wait
people
for the
who get
mooring?
floats give up their moorings, or,
90% of them might be.
yeah?
Yes.
See, and that's a,
We prefer to have people on the mooring?
90
Is that why you start at the mooring and not at the
I
float?
don't know why it started.
because it's easier to get a mooring.
Right, there's more moorings than floats. There's what, 400 moorings and 30 floats.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'd like us to really,
There's,
So what are you gonna say? I'm not gonna put my boat in the water and use it until I get a float?
no, but a guy just called me up yesterday, and this is the same with Dominic, a long time ago. They're like, well, what if I get a mooring for a 10-foot kayak, and I put it in 6 inches of water in Lake Beach? and I keep my kayak on that mooring, and I pay the mooring fee every year, $120. Can I put my name on the Inner Harbor float? I said, absolutely you can. That's what he did. That's what he did.
Yeah, but now you've got a boat that doesn't qualify to be on a mooring, on a float in the inner harbor. It's gotta be 22 feet.
Well, for sure, but when he does get offered an Inner Harbor float, he's already got a boat that's on a trailer waiting. And at Bertram, he said, I'm gonna put that on the Inner Harbor float, give up my kayak, which I don't use.
Yeah.
So he circumnavigated that rule.
Yeah, it's manipulating the system. I mean,
And it's a
it's,
system that, sure it is,
That's what the review is.
Yeah,
but
That raises a whole bunch of ethical questions.
yeah,
about
exactly.
What stands the
It's like-
straight face test and what doesn't.
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
It's just like
I mean-
on the finger floats, it doesn't say how big your boat needs to be. So when someone says, well, I'm not gonna put my boat in it, but I wanna keep my spot. What, can I put this 10, 15 in place? I mean, you can put a 2-inch toy boat in place. It doesn't say you can't. It doesn't have a minimum requirement right now for what your boat has. It says you can't be over 22 feet, doesn't say it has to be at least this big.
Yeah.
So
But
obviously,
that still doesn't stand the straight face test.
no.
That's a space that's being occupied by,
my kayak was in it too.
I think over the years, people realize that I'm gonna go to them and
And a
say,
finger float?
I don't like what you're doing, you know, and so, you know, if someone had a toy boat on their float, I'd say, get the toy boat out of there, or I'm going to take your spot away. I'd rather have someone use it that needs to use it than put the toy
Yeah.
boat there.
just to kind of sum this up a little bit, I'd like to go on the record as having a perspective based on the concept of rather than trying to create more and more and more and more spaces, to try to satisfy the demand, that we take an alternative approach, which is to make better use of the spaces we already have. In my opinion, the advantage to a kayak is you can carry it down the beach. I don't think we need to impose eyesores such as racks on either of the parks. Perhaps the town landing, Steamboat Landing is an more appropriate place for, to impose that sort of a visual impact, but I don't think either of the parks deserve that kind of a visual impact. The advantage to a kayak, a paddleboard, a canoe, is that you take it to the place that you want to go canoeing and kayaking on the top of your car, you carry it down the beach, you go kayaking, you carry it back up. If you insist on riding your bicycle to go kayaking, then make a trailer.
Yeah, good point, yeah.
I think
These are all good ideas.
there's a limit to how many spaces we can create in this harbor. I think we need to recognize that we may be very close to having already created as many spaces as we can without having a really dramatic negative impact on the aesthetic of the harbor. So let's focus on making better use, better allocation of the spaces that we already have. And maybe even reduce some of the moorings so that we get our anchorage back, which we no longer have, which I'm surprised that the Army Corps is willing to accept. This should be a harbor of safe refuge. This should be a place where when someone gets themselves in a little bit of a bind, the weather's not what they thought it was going to be, they should be able to come in here and drop an anchor and know that it's going to be a safe place, a place of safe haven. But we don't have that right now. We've filled the anchorage with moorings. What used to be designated anchorage is now full of moorings. So we've already exceeded our ability to create new spaces. We're beyond that, in my opinion. I think we need to
Well said, well said.
step back, perhaps even reduce the number of moorings in the outer harbor, not add any more floats to the inner harbor, figure out how to allocate that limited resource in a more equitable way. And I think that ties in with this database.
Yeah, absolutely.
A person looking for a mooring in Camden Harbor should be able to get on their cell phone or their laptop and click on Moorings Camden Harbor and see the ones that aren't being occupied and see how big a boat it's suitable for. And see that there's a mooring available.
That's great.
Although that
theory,
changes. Like you said, somebody
Yeah,
gets a
but
bigger boat, you
but
move the mooring.
He's talking about the dream
Right,
for the
yeah.
Dream software.
I'm not
That's not that
limiting-
far away.
I'm not- yeah, we're there already.
Yeah, we are.
You know, like I said on the last meeting, if Amazon can exist,
Interactive.
obviously, we're not Amazon. I
That,
understand.
that person can say,
I'm just
I want
saying,
that mooring. They can
the
actually say,
technology.
I want that mooring. And they can click on it and say, and they can reserve it themselves. I'm coming in, I want that mooring.
Oh, I
It'll
see.
show up on her in mind that, hey, look at that, bing, I just got, oh, look at that, Bo just, hey, he just paid Venmo, he already paid for the mooring. I mean, that day's coming, I know. it is.
They can enter their credit card number and pay for the mooring for the night.
Exactly.
We have that capacity. We don't need to live in an environment anymore where we're trying to do this all manually.
Right. This is good, I like this. We're getting,
It's just thinking outside, I mean, let's just take it to where it could be, you know, not be hamstrung by
where it was.
by how we've always been doing it.
Met a couple last night that
All
are
right.
in Stockton Harbor for that same reason.
Yeah, let's move on.
So,
good.
let's
All
move
good
on.
talk, all good points.
You talk about a full
the
harbor.
rates.
Been to Vinyl Haven lately?
Yeah.
Full harbor.
A lot of fishermen.
I mean, you can barely drive between
Lot
the
of fishing.
boats.
Yeah. They're almost all fishing.
Oh, yeah.
Lovely
yeah.
spots.
Yeah, 3 guest moorings.
All right, so, review wait list and procedures. I think we've just kind of discussed a
Covered that.
lot of that.
I think 6 and 7 are this together, wouldn't they be,
Um,
to some degree?
Almost with 5, 5, 6,
some
7.
degree, but I think
6,
they're
7, yeah.
different,
Okay.
I'd like to ask about the fees and
yes.
how those became established. Because originally, it was $10 to register,
For a mooring?
to put your name on a list.
Oh, wait list?
Yeah, I mean, the cost of putting your name on a list should just cover the
The maintenance of it.
paperwork.
The way it was explained to me when the wait list was started by Jim French, it was, they just put a fee on there because anybody and everybody was putting their name on the wait list. So when it was $10, it made people like reach into their pocket.
Yep.
And that's what created the
People are more
fee.
serious about
Yes.
Yeah, but now it's.
25.
well,
Now it's,
75 for an inner harbor. Well,
To be on the
Wait
list?
list is 25.
25 to be on the list, yeah.
I think you guys can
No.
talk about fees at another time. I
Yeah,
don't know about
that's-
fees now, that's
Yeah,
for sure, but
yeah.
you guys can definitely get together as a working group and talk about fees, and I'm glad to help you with that. You know,
Yeah.
but you got Ben right here, he's 20 years going over fees every year, and that's, you know, he'd be a great wealth of knowledge to talk about why they came up with certain things.
Yep. Okay, next.
But I just do want to say that it seems a little bit odd to talk about fees in one, item 7, while we're looking at fees and rates and late fees in 6, so.
6
I
and
think
7 are definitely related.
They definitely need
They're,
to be.
they're separate but related.
Yeah, yeah, so I would hate for have
Well,
different recommendations sitting at cross purposes.
I don't understand how.
Okay.
I mean, this is the rate fee schedule right here, all right? And then there's a whole nother process of how the wait list is dealt with and the procedures, all right? So, to me, those are two distinct items.
I agree.
You agree?
Sure.
You agree?
Sure.
Next, Windjammer licensing agreements. Yes,
Can I speak to this one?
sure.
I'm going to make a pitch. I think this should be high priority for you, and here's why. First, a couple sort of things I've observed over the years, and note, I have zero financial interest in the day sailors or the Windjammers. I hear, and I've heard it from some members of the new select board, kind of we should not be involved in these businesses because they are private businesses. I think that misses, I mean, it sort of sounds obvious, like we shouldn't be telling Lyman Morris what to charge for bottom job, but it's not reality. The town is deeply involved in these businesses. It cannot extradite itself from that. These licenses have been evolving over many years. Every detail of them is important to those businesses. We change, how they for years, I've thought it was a great idea to try to consolidate the day sailor sales. They object voraciously. I mean, and I get that. They don't think it will work as well for them. They can't sell their trips as a group like they can individually. There's just so much detail there, and it's evolved very slowly that, the town's been really conservative how they've done that. I mean, it took years before we granted the 7 day sailor licenses allowed by the ordinance. We rejected numerous boats, fearful it would be too many, too busy. But the Windjammer thing has sat there. I think the license has been the same for 30, 40 years. Nobody remembers how it got written, the way it is written. It seemed to be working fine. That got blown up last year when the select board decided to grant, a bunch of day sales to boats that only had 3 permitted day sales with very strict contingencies on them. They had to get permission from the ones at the library park, had to get permission from the library, which controls the park, and the select board does not. 10 days in advance, tell the harbor master 7 days in advance. There's all this stuff. It caused a lot of bad feelings that you're going to hear about in the future. Now, so those licenses were changed. All the Windjammers except one entity objected to the change. That was sort of a running change while they had the licenses in hand. Now you're looking at issuing a new 3-year license to those Windjammers. There was a lot of discussion about what makes sense for them last summer, and some of it's in your old minutes. There was a working group that met that I chaired probably 6, 7 times. Some of that work with the day sailor things went forward, not to the select board, which in hindsight was an error because they didn't think we did anything, but to the town management. The application for the day sailor license was modified, but I think you'll hear about that. At any rate, the Windjammer license really deserves a thorough looking at, and I'm happy to submit some of those papers from that working group if you'd like, just because there was some work done, but it's going to be up to you what you recommend to the committee. And I think I'm going to get myself in trouble, but after all this conservative time, I think the town not only is involved in the businesses, they got to care deeply about the health of those businesses. I sit on my boat a lot, probably more abnormally amount in the Inner Harbor, and sometimes I think, what would this be like? What would the harbor be like if there weren't any day sailors, or there were many fewer? And I think it would really hurt the harbor. It's not just having people come, and it's the activity in the harbor that they create. And they feel very threatened by big Windjammers doing day sales. I sort of get that, but the truth is, what's happening down there now doesn't seem to be very successful. I really think you've got to look at maybe a radical change. The biggest Windjammer licensed properties, main Windjammer cruises, 3 boats, public landing, they seem to be struggling. The town is, would be hiding sort of some obvious facts. The town's got to consider, what if we give a long-term license to them and they fail right there in place? Stop paying, don't use the boats. And the boats are being well kept now, but that could change. Why shouldn't the town consider an RFP, decide what you would like to see done at that major space in the harbor, and see who would like to do it? It could be traditional boats, it could be these dinner sales. That would really annoy the day sailors. I don't know what the right answer is, but it is your right to look at that, consider it, try to sell the select board on it. I think it should be high on your priority list.
So, I guess I'm confused. Are you saying that the business is in the process of maybe failing, and we should look at, like, replacing it with something else?
Yeah.
Eliminate the day sailors, or the,
Oh.
not the day sailors, the windjammers?
No, no, to see what else, who else could operate in that,
In that
extremely
space.
valuable space.
Yeah.
If there was somebody interested.
Mm-hmm.
How to do it. I mean, right now, truly the reason this permission to do day sales was because the company said, geez, we can't fill our boats with regular windjammer business. Now, you got a bunch of windjammers that seem to be doing fine in that business. This has always been those boats, through multiple owners, they're a different model than most. They're a one owner
Well,
with 3 boats.
I think a prime example of what you may be talking about is Wayfair Marine that couldn't succeed, but look at what Lyman Morris is doing.
Exactly.
You know?
But the town had very little to do with that, but the town is intimately involved in this. That license is,
Well, the town did have a lot to do with that because, you know,
well, zoning.
yes,
in terms of-
it would, it would
Wait till the
be,
parking complaints.
it would be
Yes.
condos now if it weren't.
But the town is even much more deeply involved in the business of these windjammers. You're providing them a home, for their vessels at a discount, which is, in the ordinance. It sort of agrees to do that and I think rightfully so.
I think, Ben, it's confusing because I hear several things you're saying here. One is that you think that aesthetically it's good to have the day sailors coming and going, that it adds character to the harbor.
Yep.
And I think this is a place where people come to see windjammers.
And
Ride
windjammers.
down the town dock, you expect to see windjammers.
Oh,
Well,
I think the
and
windjammers
so
are great
if we're
too.
going to have,
But
we're on
I think
the
what-
cusp of trying to decide what we want the inner harbor to look like, what we want the whole harbor to look like.
Okay, well, can I?
Maybe what you might be saying is, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but an option might be put it out for bid, and if there are other more successful windjammers that want that spot,
You're gonna end up with catamarans with pirates on the sails.
no,
No, you can-
No,
No, if you put that one up for bid, you gotta put them all up for bid.
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a bad
I'm
idea.
just throwing it out there for
No,
discussion.
but it goes to my point. We're on the cusp of deciding what do we want the inner harbor to look like.
Yes.
When someone comes here to see windjammers, they're gonna expect to see windjammers unless we throw the windjammers out.
Yeah.
And then what takes its place?
Yeah.
A whole bunch of sneakers, boats that look like sneakers are gonna show up and pay top dollar to spend the night. Camden is not gonna look any different than
The nice thing
another
about
wide
Europe
spot
now
in the
is we've
road.
got a very good eclectic version of boats.
Go ahead,
Boats.
Ben.
Include, the town has every right to say the kind of boats they want there. We had a parachute speedboat once try to come to the public. You never saw that selling tickets on the town has a right to do that. But what evolved was a windjammer business that looked very solid, beautiful boats to have in the harbor, and a day sailor business that's gotten very healthy, doing a ton of business. Now they've gotten mixed up by a change in the licensing, and it looks threatening to, I don't know how much it is, but it's.
It looks, but is it?
Well,
and
but the fact it isn't, the fact that those boats aren't going out with 150 people on them for dinner cruises, may be good for the day sailors, but it means the town didn't really offer a new option to visitors that they want to use, and the business is not really succeeding. So if you have a.
So maybe it takes care of itself.
Yeah, well, except then what happens? What if the business starts to fail? I'm just saying,
Yeah.
it's worth.
It won't be
looking at.
because the rates aren't.
I'm not saying,
aren't
sorry.
right. If you want to know the history, Ben, of the windjammer business, I can fill you in on it. I mean, I can tell you that it has struggled for a number of reasons.
The whole windjammer business?
Yes.
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
it's in a situation, there's, last count, there were 23 big vessels for sale. At one point, there were 27. 3 of them got auctioned off. Some of them have been auctioned off twice. Banks won't go near them
Yeah,
because too many of them have failed and the bank's been left stranded.
yeah. Well, there are some.
And the
like-
reason for that is that there was a pie being divided up into smaller pieces. The pie wasn't getting bigger. They weren't advertising in, I mean, I can go on and on about it, I bore you to death with the history of the Windjammer business.
Well, speaking to
But you're not
that,
gonna be able to salvage the Windjammer business. The town won't be able to effect a change. You can keep the cost of tying a boat up reasonable so that it should be affordable, and that's the best the town can do. We can go into the history of why there's a specific space for windjammers and why there's a specific space for day sailors.
Right.
I can tell you that history. I won't bore you with it now.
Yeah.
But it was for very specific reasons. There was a bigger boat came along looking to do day sails, and it was too big to sail from the day sail float. Okay? Can they sail from a windjammer float? Nope. Windjammers do overnight trips, by definition. It's in the ordinance.
it's more than one
They
night.
sailed, what? I'm telling you why it came about. There was a boat. That's why it came about. There was a boat that wanted to do that. There may be more now, yes. But we're changing the definition of windjammer.
So circling back around, I agree with Ben in a few aspects and not in others. But the primary one being that this is something that I think is critically important to the harbor.
Yep.
And I do think should be quite high on this list, higher than it is currently. It was a polarizing, I guess, topic last time around. And because the Windjammer licenses are up for renewal, next, as I understand it, next spring, then I think this,
So
it's
April.
sort of negligent on our part if we don't tackle it. I don't think we should go into the weeds of, as Ronnie's correct in pointing out, there's a lot of history here that we should make sure we understand. But I think dealing with how commercial vessels operate from town-owned property is an important aspect of what the Harbor Committee does. And so I do think that is something that should be higher on the list. I am going to regret this, but I would be willing to help on that subcommittee.
Can I add, we had some, there were some positive ideas, like, currently, the Windjammers can't do just a one-night sail, and why not? It's not competitive with the day sailors, it works for the kind of vessels they are. I mean, I might add, I wanted to add, that we're providing some great trips out of Camden. That's why it's working so well. The day sailors, they're good boats, it's a great place to day sail out of. The Windjammers are great operations, and it's a great place to do long cruises out of for that size boat. I really question, I mean, these Windjammers are not great, especially some of them are not great at day sails. They don't, so that they don't generate people getting off and say, that was fantastic, I'm gonna tell my friends to do this. And that's how, that's the position the town has gotten itself in, is it can't help it, but looking at the viability, do we want a business that's not really serving people well?
Because because numbers 8 and 9 have become so intertwined, I wonder if they should be consolidated into one work plan item.
One of the ideas put forward was to allow them to do charter day sails, which is a longer day, encourage the Windjammers, and they seemed interested in this, in going out and finding,
Chairperson, I really think this.
corporate kind of accounts, that sort of,
Yeah.
sorry?
Groups.
Groups, yeah, planned ahead,
Getting into the-
long day.
All right, so,
Shut up, thank you.
we got it. It's certainly gonna take a lot of our time,
But I had a
all right? The
different question
Windjammers and the day sailors.
related to that, but
Yes.
I had a historical question. When the tugboat that was a dinner boat was on Shop Wharf, was that, how did that license work? Because on some level, that's
It was
a
private
marine
property.
boat. Okay, and it's just, so that's the distinction for the Windjammers, is that they're town docks.
Appledore is private
Okay,
property.
Because struck me as very entrepreneurial, and I'm forgetting why it failed.
So, and I think,
It failed just because there wasn't a demand for,
Okay.
for that
Because
specific.
I'm
I
just
mean, it
wondering,
failed, it
to
failed for
some-
the same reason a lot of restaurants fail.
Right, okay, because that was the whole thing when I remember reading about the Windjammers was,
I think a lot of this also ought to be focused on, what is in the best interest of the town and what is in the best interest of the harbor.
Right.
And, some of that is, the day sailors now, there are 7 day sailors with the ability to go to 14. Now, if you've got 14 day sailors coming in and out of this harbor,
So the
that's a big impact.
limit on day sailors has been removed?
No, it's 7,
They can have 2 boats.
but you can sell for another boat on your table.
So how does that schedule down?
Well,
Well,
they,
they
the second boat
can't-
can't use the float,
You can't,
but they can sell tickets for it.
I see.
So by definition, the second boat could be just operating as a private boat out of Lyman Morris or somewhere else. The town has no say in that.
Right,
So you
As long as they're not
could,
operating.
you could get the 14 boats regardless of what rules you set.
yes.
The idea of the second boat was to give them the opportunity to.
But what we're doing as a town is we're promoting the ability to have a second boat. Basically, so so they could, they could pick up, when the Appledore is out, say.
Well,
You
no,
know.
they have the ability to have a second boat regardless, but they don't have the option of selling a ticket at the
Right.
kiosk.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. That's all,
It's a separate license, victualler's
Yeah,
license.
it's an option to say $500, and because I pay money, and because I've done all the things right, and because continually every year I get to I pay my fee to the town so I can have a day sailor and use the day sailor dock, which has a specific schedule by the harbor master in this department. Because I do that, I have the option now to pay an extra $500 and then sell tickets for a different boat that does not use the town float. That's the new thing.
Yeah.
3 years
so
ago.
where do they
Tickets
load the,
And-
where
but-
does the
From
hour
private
That
go?
doesn't,
They
that,
can't load on town property.
the only thing is that they, Kathy, they do have to make sure that it doesn't impact parking, and there's certain things that the harbor committee reviews before they say, okay.
That would be all part of this
They,
review.
sometimes on the town dock out, I forget the name, Steamboat Landing. I've seen the Lively Lady load there, and they bring tour buses down there. Is that,
Yeah, that's part of the question, honestly, is, that is town-owned property.
Yeah, these
Are
are,
they
the
loading
old harbor
passengers?
committee was kind of like, well, we want to promote this, and once in a while, if it's okay,
Yeah.
I don't have a set rule of what, now, the Live Lady has these cruise ships come in, and a lot of times he's like, well, it makes sense that they just come to the other side of the day sailor float, if it's available, Steve, because these old and infirm people, instead of making them go up a slippery ramp and come down another slippery ramp to get on my boat, why don't they just go across this little dock and get on my boat? And,
why doesn't the Lively Lady go to the cruise ship?
yeah, and sometimes he comes right to the town dock and
Yep,
says, let them
yep.
come to the town dock, get off and get onto my boat. I can't argue with that, but at the same time, it's a little gray on whether or not I should be allowing that. So that's something that we should kind of concrete up here too.
And was there nobody raised the flag about saying that giving a day sailor who can't sail from the town dock, the right to sell a ticket at a kiosk, which is located on the town dock? And how unfair that is to someone coming in, trying to find an opportunity to do some day sales in Camden. It gives them a completely unfair advantage in terms of capturing the potential customer.
Yeah, so these are all
I think
things.
that was- I think
these are
that
all
was a big
things.
mistake, letting that happen, I think.
Um,
Just my opinion.
So how far up the list do you want to move these items?
I think that should go after harbor cleanliness. I think the first one
5
would
and
be.
6? So we'll call it 5 and 6?
You're moving 8 and 9 to 5 and 6.
9 becomes 5 and 6.
And I guess I'd ask for that report from the captains sooner rather than later. I really thought we were gonna get it.
I haven't seen that. I'm debating whether to pull them off the agenda next
Well,
meeting.
I've only got hearsay and what I read in the paper, so if I don't actually get some data, and I don't really wanna read through the past minutes, I will, but
Yeah,
I just feel like they came in here in a hustle to tell us.
yeah.
We need
Why
to
don't we
hear
just say, if we don't have an agenda from the day sailers by Friday, then
Your report.
they're not on our agenda.
Can it be communicated to them?
Yeah.
Oh, and is there,
I was very clear at the last meeting that I wanted the agenda
Yeah.
so
before the
that we could do
meeting.
the research.
And if it's that important to them,
Is the licensing agreement, it's not in here, is it? The current licensing agreement, is it,
I have one here
where do I get all that?
from
Is it
Liz.
online?
Liz can send it.
Okay, great.
Please don't, you really want to look at the application as well as the agreement, because the application is what you will receive and make a recommendation to the select board
Application for
for the day sailor license.
the day sailor?
Yeah.
How many applications are there pending?
For this November?
I mean, are there, is there
Right
a stack of applications, people who would like to go run a day sail out of Camden if they could?
No, that's because no one ever does, because it seems like it's locked up. You know, if a new person come in and say, I'd like to try this boat, you guys consider this,
It is locked up, except for purchasing one of the boats that's already running.
it is locked up. That's an issue that could be brought into effect. How do we keep it so we keep a more, so less stagnant, the same boats all the time? And not only that, this is my pet peeve. They get to use that dock, and then when they go to sell the boat, they get pretty 99.9% sell that berth with it. So sure, the berth, I mean, a boat could be worth X amount by itself out on the globe, but running in Camden off that dock, which is, you're gonna be assured, it's worth 3X plus 5.
Well, that's where the discussion, what does Camden want itself to look like, comes in. What do we want to look like?
Yeah,
Well,
The
but
boats-
they're not guaranteed that spot.
yeah, they are.
They are?
No, they're not.
But,
Yeah, they are.
yeah, by custom.
By custom, yes.
But they still have to go before the select board. The select board
I'd
can
really
say,
like to speak to them, because what's typically happened is when there was a transfer, the parties have come to the harbor committee and say, we're thinking of doing this. Do you think they will be granted? They're all on a yearly license. They'd like 3 years, by the way, and they make a pretty good case for why, they're businesses which have gotten sort of substantial.
well, it's
pretty
tough,
tenuous.
it's tough to create a business plan on a
They
one-year
don't know if they're
lease.
gonna get a license the next year. I mean,
Right.
the harbor committee was always very clear. You don't own this. You don't own this space. You don't own this right to do this. You are licensed by the town.
Yes.
And you cannot sell that license. So there was always a permission, but it was a process, understandably, where they tried to figure out, is everything favorable here? Is this new party gonna get the license?
But then again,
I
it's
think
not.
they always did.
They've never been turned down.
No,
On sale.
100% of the boats since I've been here in 20 years, every single one of them has been turned over, and not one of them was, it always goes.
Pushed out, yeah,
That's right, but I think it was always clear that it didn't have to go that way.
yeah.
No,
And
it
that's
didn't,
the
but it does.
So, and the other
Sure,
thing,
that's-
the other thing I'd like to stress, when you're dealing with day sailors and windjammers, they're licensed, it's a lease agreement with the town, all right? When it becomes too contentious to deal with tenants, you don't renew their lease, And I think we need to, address that and let them know, come in civil. And if you have discussions, let's try to work it out. But if we have people that can't get along with people, then it's too small, too tight an area.
Yeah, I think Steve has always, or the harbor master's always been able to use that as a cudgel, and the one at the meeting where this harbor committee reviews applications, question number one is, Steve, is everybody playing fair, and would respond to his comments about it. So-
And with that, the application should be a review process also of how they've performed and how they get along with the harbor and how whether they've been manipulating,
Yeah, in my
Aspects,
logbook,
you
my
know.
logbook would say how many times they or their skippers were told to slow down in the federal navigable waterway because of complaints.
Yep.
All that
Yep.
stuff, which we do, we look at that.
But I do want to go, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But I also think, reflecting on what Ron said about the aesthetics of the harbor, there, when I was between 10 and 14, there was nothing sadder than Camden in the summer between Tuesday and Friday, when there were no tall masts in the harbor, because we didn't have the day sail culture. Everybody was out every week.
Yeah.
For the full week, and it was just bleak. And here's little me in my little rowboat, but, you know, and it was an aesthetic, and people, I remember working in the service industry, and people would say, well, I thought this was a windjammer harbor. Well, they're out sailing. And so we have to be mindful of that.
Oh, I understand,
That's
yeah.
our marketing
Yeah.
message, and the day sailors provide those tall masts during the week.
So this is,
So does Matt.
That's one positive,
'Cause it
well,
never
that is one positive impact
Yeah.
that the.
Looks like it's an active
The
windjammer.
questionable success of the windjammer business has brought about.
It applies to the shoulder
Ben,
seasons too.
Yeah.
Ben, please.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
That because the windjammer business is perhaps in the process of failing, at least part of it, not all of it, and and then you run into a challenge where, okay, one windjammer, by definition is a windjammer, is very successful,
okay,
where there
See.
are others that not so much. And the question comes up, can the town have any impact on the success of the ones that are not so much? Probably not.
all right. So these are going to be a couple of very difficult, contentious, issues. We're going to need to discuss this a lot. And we'll probably be discussing it at every meeting until the license agreements come up. So, that'll give us all a chance to, sit back until the next meeting, think it through, understand it, come up with different ideas, and, we're going to discuss it. But one thing, I'd just like to,
Can I just ask, though, that it was the day sailors that had the report, have the windjammer captains pulled together in any collective way, the same way the day sailors have around their working industry?
No.
No.
There is a day sailor organization now, association, something.
But they've always had
come
a-
together. No, that's
The what?
that's fairly new, but
Okay.
the windjammers, the Camden windjammers, have not banded together in the same fashion, no.
all right,
Now,
so,
all the windjammers are, licenses are on the same date schedule?
yes. Yeah, it's all the same license agreement, the same date, same everything.
Uh-huh, and the current expiration is the end of April.
April 2020, yep.
Just from the perspective, the historical perspective, it's hard to understand for me how the town got involved in licensing the Mary Day and the Angelique and the Louis R. French. Because they don't sail from town property.
I think learning what exactly the requirements of Harbor Park are as they relate to the town is gonna be part of this review. Because my understanding is that it is town property, but I've also heard that exact thing, that that's not town property, that's owned by the library. But the library operates under this
Managed by the town.
odd.
I think Ben may
arrangement.
have information on this.
It is town property, but it is entirely managed by the library trustees. That's the way it was set up.
But it is
We
owned
ran
by
into
the town
this
of
last
Camden.
summer. Also, the head of the Harbor Windjammers did send a single representative to the working group last summer, Jenny from, I forget the name of, but
The history is that when the Mary Day was kicked out of what's now the Fisherman's Wharf, the select board voted Monday night, the last week of the season, without notifying my father, so he wasn't there to represent himself, and so we came in that following Saturday morning. Rusty Robinson marched up and said, "You can't sail from here next year." So we had to look around for an alternative. And that's when both sides of the railway at American Boathouse got dredged. A ramp was built that was accessed from American Boathouse property. There was a ramp that went across the railway. The Stephen Tabor and the Mary Day, and then the Angelique all sailed from that facility. Then American Boathouse was sold from Ken Carlson, who, by the way, put it on the National Historical Registry, and that's why it's going to remain appearance-wise the way it was. He sold, Bill Cannell said, I want this to myself now. So once again, we were faced with where we're going to sail from. I mean, you talk about not having any ability to plan, to make a business plan from one year to the next. We didn't know from one year to the next where we were going to be sailing from, let alone whether or not the town was going to renew our lease. So we reached into our pockets again and paid to have the space, the next space over. There's 3 spaces now for schooners to float, whereas initially there was no place for a boat to float. There was no place for a boat to float at the Fisherman's Wharf. My father paid to have that dredged. Just history. I'm not, no brownie points here, just saying that's the history.
Yeah.
So the town, it was George Martens, who was chairman of the library committee.
Yeah.
Went to
Ron, I think we really need to focus on where we're at now. I know you have a lot of history,
But it's a good point in terms of the library versus the town, and
Yeah.
are they the same, interchangeable? Is the library benefit?
I think
They'll
if
be
we
part
don't,
of
I think if we don't
the
review the history, we won't understand
Oh, yeah.
how to make decisions.
But I think we're working on the work plan
Yeah, yeah,
here,
yeah,
as
absolutely.
opposed
But-
to
but- I mean,
resolving
yeah,
issues.
and we
Can
should
I add
get
a
through that.
factoid that sort of follows up on that?
Okay.
So we realized as a working group last summer, because we'd never really messed with the Windjammer license, it's just been turned over and over and over for years. That the town, when the select board allowed 15-day sales for those Windjammers, they had no right to do that. They didn't consult the library trustees. In fact, our recommendations now to, allow charters, allow one nights, take away the 10-day notification to the library, which hadn't really been done very much anymore.
Well, but the point is, I think,
We were told we couldn't do that. We couldn't bring that to the select board because they had to talk to the library. So the library's still involved at some level. It's complicated.
it is. But it's not that complicated for Ray, because he doesn't have to have approval from the library, right? So the select board approved it, Ray can do it. The other boats need approval from the library.
Correct. But they all used to operate under the same rules and pay the same
Yeah.
approximate prices. Now you've separated them. They are.
I know. It's,
You separated them without changing the prices. That's what I'm saying. It's
Yeah,
complicated.
there's certain.
All right.
You designated certain spaces in the harbor as Windjammer spaces.
I've had a question, so why don't I'll just read this and get an opinion, maybe? This is in reference to the day sailor license agreement. And it's about their parking downtown, or in the landing, all right? Says, the licensee shall prohibit any employee, supplier, contractor, or agent of the licensee or any crew member of the day sailor vessel from parking in the parking spaces at the public landing, with the exception of one parking space for one vehicle owned or used by the licensee or employee of the licensee. It is the intent of Camden to allow the licensee to use one parking space at the public landing for a vehicle to be parked in the parking space during emergencies, for the storage of brochures and other supplies, to provide shelter for employees during inclement weather, and for no other purpose whatsoever. To me, that does not say they can park there all day.
I don't see a time limit defined in that statement.
I think because of the
Inclement weather.
inclement weather and the storage, I think this one relates to the ticket sellers, so that when the thunderstorm rolls through, they have a place to
Yep.
dump the table.
Yep.
So I think that's why they're allowed to park there.
I understand that, but if you've got beautiful weather and no reports of storms, or, I think it's a stretch of what the
But
intent
if
was.
you're hiring someone to sit at that table all summer,
Mhm.
and he or she lives in Appleton, the reason they're able to take that job is they know they got one parking spot.
There are plenty of parking spots in town.
Well,
If you get there at 6 in the morning.
well, that's
No,
no
no,
different
no.
than an employee
But
at
I'm
a
just
store.
sa- I
store,
get
yeah.
that, but they've got their allocation right there, so that's what they're gonna do, and that's what they're offering that employee. I'm not saying it's right or wrong.
So
I'm
you're
just
saying,
that's why
that
it
gives
works.
them the
That's
ability
the
to
way
park
I
there
read-
all
The way
day?
I heard that, yeah, sure.
I think because it is, states that it is more than a parking space for a personal vehicle, it's a storage vehicle. That's really what I think they're providing, is a ability to store stuff during the day, not overnight. And
And
I think that's sort of a necessary part of their land-based operation. That could change if the ticket booths were to change. I could see that.
Here's a question for you. If you're gonna let Windjammers do day sales, are you gonna give them a kiosk on the town dock?
That's a whole
And a
different
parking spot.
subject here.
Yeah.
I know. See, I mean, we've got our work cut out for us here.
This states they can use one parking space. This does not state that they are given a particular space. There is no reservation for a space.
Right.
The term permit came into my mind, although it's not used anywhere in this one or the Windjammer agreement. So it's subject to availability.
That's right.
Word
Not a space is designated for any particular boat.
But I do know,
the word emergency in there too.
Yeah.
So,
So what is,
by intent, if it's not an emergency, then you shouldn't be there.
taking advantage.
It mentions emergency, but it also mentions storage of brochures, et cetera.
yes.
But I also know that there's a person who said to me, who's renting my mother's driveway, who has a relationship with a day sailor, that periodically he has parked his vehicle on the landing because they're allowed one spot. And I said, really? Interesting.
It's an interpretation.
So that's 7 spots right there. Oh, taken out.
They get a pass.
Yep,
with
but
their-
that's 7 parking spots right there every day that are full.
And all I
Plus
could
the
think
harbor
of,
master.
but what I'm saying is he was saying he had a spot. Did that mean that the ticket person didn't use it that day? I would say no, because they were working. So I think there's a
They only
free.
get one permit.
Yeah.
And so whether the other person chooses to roll the dice beyond 2
Okay,
hours, that's
okay.
up.
I mean, I didn't want to get into it, but I remember thinking, oh,
How
here's more
about this?
interpretation.
If you're gonna let a lobsterman park there all day, you're gonna discriminate between one commercial enterprise and another?
I mean, lobstermen have always been a protected species.
Not always. No, that wasn't even, they didn't have any guaranteed space at the town dock until
Yeah, but
1973, 74, when the Mary Day was kicked out.
I found it interesting that the day sailor agreement with respect to parking has a lot of words there. It's a whole paragraph there, section 6. In the Windjammer agreement, it's one sentence. It has none of the qualifications that are stated in the day sailor agreement. Camden will provide the licensee one parking permit per berthing slip leased. And there's no terms or conditions other than that.
That's, what-
So each schooner gets one spot.
That's Windjammer.
Is that at the public landing?
It doesn't say.
so anyways, I think that's something that needs to be addressed,
something they can occupy when they're out sailing.
Ron. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed when we're looking at the day sailors, you know? I mean, there isn't a business in town that is allowed to, like, employees to park right in front of their business, you know? It's just
Lobsterman.
lobster, well. Yes.
Two comments, if you don't
You
mind.
can all huddle in the harbor master's office during the thing.
This has come up before, and I think the day sailors are aware that maybe the parking thing is a bit much. I
Yes,
believe they're soft about
enforcing,
giving up that privilege.
yeah.
you know, it's come up in discussion of other things, changes to the public landing that might reduce some of the parking spaces. Number two, I've advocated for a number of years monitoring the fishing parking spots. I mean, what you'll often see, you go down there and every single available spot is filled, and there are 3 or 4 fisherman slots open. And the issue is, are there more than there need to be? And the only way you could determine that would be sort of regular monitoring during the hours that they are exclusively for the fishermen.
Yep.
And then maybe I think you could make a fair decision. 1 or 2 could be subtracted. I don't know how to play it, but it does look strange that sometimes.
I know.
It does make a place where people do drop-offs and people stay in their car. Some tourists just go to places where they can stay in their car and look out. It's good for them.
So anyways, we've got a lot to look at. And, the next thing on the list is review T.Y. Lin Public Landing Report, which is on the website. Does everybody know how to get to that website? Okay.
Yeah.
And that's just informational.
Is it hard to get to other than the?
It's, you go to the town of,
Yeah.
the town of Camden, you go to the Development Office tab, and then under that, you've got Special Reports tab, and the 2013 is where the report is. Got it?
Can I make a recommendation that I know that the town seems it is a priority for public use and access, but given some of the other topics, and some of the other topics are gonna directly influence public use and access, that's not our number one.
Yeah, I was thinking that we should consolidate some of these, and like 1 and 2 is something for us to do, but I don't think
Right,
that's
that's-
something to present to the select committee that we're all gonna read.
Right.
So if we're moving down, I took the 1 and 2 off, then number 3 becomes the number 1 item, and I think that it's a vitally important discussion, but I do think to some degree it will be always part of a discussion within some of these other options.
And I would think number 10 can go under number 3. It's part of.
True, yeah.
And I did all of them a little bit. I said, under the mooring management, we could combine 5, 6, and 7, mooring management and fees. And that way we'd have like a 4 bullet point list to provide the town, and I think this is a good list. Some of these seem to overlap to me.
So that within
So to
harbor
limit the scope,
management, there would be
so we'll have
more.
4 separate projects to work on as opposed to 10.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
in the comprehensive plan dated June of 2017, there are directives for the Harbor Committee. And those, there are a few, and they include Curtis Island, make Curtis Island more user-friendly.
Yep.
There are general ones here. Study benefits of creating a plan to deal with sea level rise, storm surge, runoff, et cetera.
What page are you on in the comprehensive plan?
I can't state pages for these items. I reviewed the plan and just made a list as I was going through it.
It's under recommendations?
Public
Is
access.
that at the end of the document there?
Public access?
You're looking under, in the ordinances?
No,
No,
this is the comprehensive plan.
comprehensive plan. Climate change. Yes, they're in here. And see, in my document, I highlighted Harbor Committee. Everywhere Harbor Committee was mentioned in the comprehensive plan. And Curtis Island should be more user-friendly. And it's not just on the Harbor Committee. This is Harbor Master, the caretaker for Curtis Island, to use that example. Harbor use and management. A lot of them are kind of general. However, there were these specific ones about dealing with sea level rise, et cetera. And the Curtis Island access. That's in the comprehensive plan. We haven't discussed those items. So should those be added to our
list of work plan objectives.
Well,
We can solve climate change, we are.
And maybe some actions have been taken.
climate change, I think, is being dealt with through other committees.
Federal
The
government.
T.Y. Lin plan has something about that, doesn't it? About rebuilding the public landing?
Yes, yes. And I think there's a lot going on with that aspect that we don't really need to focus on it.
Okay.
We can certainly be aware of it, but there's a lot of people working on that.
Okay.
But I would argue
X.
that the work plan that we've developed
Should
here
reflect
does
that.
actually, it does deal with the 5 points, that are recommendations that are in that comp plan. Public access is obviously, what is currently item number 3, possibly item number 1. Discuss ways to increase public use and access. So obviously, that deals with that. Harbor use and management is the next recommendation, and that, I think, will be obviously dealt with through mooring management, which we've already said is maybe broader than just moorings. Commercial uses is the next item, and that's obviously the day sailors, windjammers, and rates.
Well, that includes fishermen and,
And fishermen, because that will come into our purview. As we've said, climate change, I think we will be consulted on it, but it's not sort of, I don't think we're gonna be able to solve climate change here. And then lastly, protection of harbor waters would certainly be currently number 4, harbor cleanliness, which
Right.
is. So, the only other thing that I did wanna mention, because we brought up at the last meeting and didn't make it into the work plan, is the role of cruise ships, and where does that fall into here? I don't think we need to go into it too deeply today, but I do think reflecting the increased use of the harbor by another commercial entity, aka cruise ships, should be on our work plan. How do we, I think that will be both in the mooring management, because that's gonna be anchorage areas, that was brought up, as well as, where they offload their passengers, et cetera. So I think that will come to us. I see that tender coming more and more every single year. So, I think we'd be sticking our head in the sand to say that we don't wanna deal with that.
at least
So
look at it, yeah.
I think we just need
So-
to put it on here. I would argue that we could do that through, what we currently say is mooring management, I think could be harbor and mooring management, or
Yeah.
something of that nature, because it is broader than just the moorings.
Yeah, you see, I mean, you guys are trying to like condense everything, and I'm trying to like,
Expand it a little bit.
I'm trying to like
Have specific goals.
be specific
Yeah,
about everything, and so, but, maybe we should have that as a separate line item, as cruise.
Or maybe we could have a category and list the 2 or 3 things, or 3 or 4 things
Well,
under
I
each
mean,
one.
we could do it that way too, all right? We could,
That way we address,
yeah,
Windjammers, day sailors, cruise ships, they're
under
Commercial,
mooring.
but they're
Actually,
not,
you're right, it is
but
all
they're-
commercial.
but they've got different issues, but they're also.
okay, so how are we gonna do this?
Well, should we reorganize this list? I like the idea of tying it to the comp plan, because I can tell you that the select board will be receptive to that. So should we
In the same order.
reorganize this list to 5 items: public access, harbor use and management, and then
Page 92.
commercial uses, and protection of harbor waters. That's actually 4 items.
Oh, they do have
And
climate change.
we'd skip
So,
climate change.
skip climate change, okay,
And
so,
that
we'll-
you would just say that, currently item 3, discuss ways to increase public use and access. That is
and that's
the-
public
That's
access.
public access, so, it's.
And if the T.Y. Lin plan comes under that, that addresses climate change, so maybe that's,
Yeah,
Well, under climate change is that
See-
protection of harbor waters, and that's what we're doing, that's what we're saying, yeah.
So number 3 would be would go under public access, currently number 3. Harbor cleanliness would go under protection of harbor waters, so that would be current number 4, would go under that. Mooring management, current number 5.
Wait, for harbor cleanliness, we're gonna put under public access?
Nope, harbor cleanliness is gonna go under protection of harbor waters. I'm just mirroring these exact phrases.
So, wait a minute, we're gonna go number 3 here.
Yeah, we use their same headings.
Yeah.
Protection of harbor
I think that's a great
waters
idea.
is harbor cleanliness. And then,
Because then we could potentially talk about the fishermen.
mooring management would be harbor use and management.
Yep. Review rates and late fees would go under commercial, what do we call that?
Well,
They call it
Not
commercial
necessarily.
uses.
would that be harbor management also?
I think that's harbor management.
I
That's,
think
that's
so.
more like
Okay.
How they've got
recreational
commercial
boaters
uses is
mostly.
very different.
Rates, okay. And then wait list is management. And then windjammer and day sailors is commercial. And also to that, we'll add cruise ships.
Should we add fishermen to that? Is that anything we have to work?
It is.
That will come
There.
into our, we do review their applications.
Okay.
so, yeah.
Because I thought it was kind of interesting. Did anyone else think about the notion of the ferry?
Yeah, no, I
was
saw
like,
that too.
what?
I was like, what is
Think of
that?
what?
The state of Maine is attempting to establish a network of passenger ferries. Camden should be aware of the potentiality of reestablishing a ferry pier at Steamboat Landing.
That was a
When this
stretch.
was-
I
Way- a big
think
stretch,
we've got
but-
plenty to do.
I think,
Oh, absolutely, but I was just, that was the first I'd ever heard of
Yeah,
whisper of it.
me too.
take on that project.
Well, I'll have to run the ferry.
All right. So,
And then last number 10,
review TY Lynn would be under,
I had it under public access. Or what?
okay. Okay,
So we now submit this, we'll go ahead with a regular scheduled meeting in 2 weeks, but
yes.
do we submit that to the, is there a select board meeting between here and there? Does it matter? Do we just
No,
Or
we
just
don't need
last
to.
night, I
No,
guess.
we're not, no, we're not
We'll
in that
finalize
big of a
this at the
rush.
next
Yeah,
meeting.
just adopt it and
yeah,
then
we'll finalize it
proceed?
next meeting.
You've just taken all this and put it under headings that were already in the.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I
what we're
think
gonna
that's a
do
great
is we're,
idea.
we're taking the headings from the comp plan, and we're gonna have bullet points underneath, under each heading.
That we consider.
So we don't delete the specific issues here, right?
Right.
Right.
Yep. I mean, we're gonna, I'll word it just the same as what I've worded here, with the changes that we've made for, like example, under 4, harbor cleanliness, we're gonna add, identify sources of pollution. Under day sailor review and windjammer review, that's, review the applications also. And,
As a committee, you're sitting and reviewing the applications for basically everybody that is looking for, that has some kind of license agreement, and making the recommendation to the select board?
yes. Yes.
Because I just wonder, the people who do the mooring inspections, are they licensed and by who?
I believe that I'm pretty sure they are because in the ordinance, it says that they shall be by a licensed inspector or something like that. Here.
So that's a
Yeah.
state?
It was in our harbor ordinance, I thought.
Remember the licensing,
Or
it's
maybe it's
like the harbor, approved by the harbor master.
Yeah, there's something there. I mean, they're certainly registered, so I don't know. That's a Steve Pixley question.
I propose that we submit our list to the select board prior to our next meeting to show that we are active and just take that step sooner rather than
Well, we've
later.
only got 2 weeks before our next meeting,
And I don't think that the
and,
administrator of the town, the select
But
board.
you're just saying send it to them. You're not trying to
Yeah,
get on any kind of
right,
an
right.
agenda, you just.
Well,
Just
There's-
submit something to.
oh, I meet with the town manager regularly. You know, and she knows we're working on this, and it's very apparent that we're active.
Okay.
Well, should the procedure be you guys vote on, because I'm not a voter, I can't vote, but on what we've done, and then you change it and send it out to all of us for comments and one more round? Is that, do you think that's necessary at all, or?
Yeah, no.
Maybe
I
not.
mean,
Yeah,
it's-
we just vote on it
I
and-
mean, we're not,
The first meeting. would be
we're
adopted.
not here to rush this through.
Okay,
All right, we're here to work it, and, you know, trust me, I mean, everybody understands that this is a brand-new committee. We're not gonna change the harbor overnight.
Okay.
And, you know, we're not gonna make any changes overnight. I mean,
Yeah.
we need to, like, if we do make changes, I wanna make sure that they're well thought out and they're done properly.
okay, good.
I have yet another question. I'm still reflecting on Ben's first thing about the kayak racks. What is the actual state of play with the kayak racks? Because it was somebody that was doing it commercially out of Ogonocoke. And there is a oversized bike rack at Steamboat. I mean,
Right.
so nothing's happening at Layton Harbor? Because that same gentleman from Ogonocoke, I thought, got some kind of, and I'm just wondering, what is the state of play, and what's our response? What are we supposed to actually reflect on? Is it that we want to encourage that the town looks at it, or do we want to discourage it to town? You know, I'm still
I
confused.
think what we ought to
where we're
look
with
at,
that.
I mean, there are, the rules are being bent at the dinghy dock.
Absolutely.
You know, the dinghy dock is for dinghies,
Right.
Yet there are
you know?
kayaks
And
out there.
dinghies are used to get out to moorings,
Right.
all right? But it's being used as full-time dockage for canoes, kayaks, sailboat. That's, you know, it's a stretch, and, you know, you stretch it here for this guy, so this guy feels like you can stretch it for him too, and it just snowballs, and it just needs to be
But that's the
addressed.
dinghy dock, but there is that oversized bike rack at Steamboat, and that's my there are 2 kayaks in it. And
Yeah, I think that's what
And then there's
they,
a dinghy dock out there.
that's what they envision as this on-land
Right.
storage
Yeah.
Which
option. I
would
mean, I
be
think as we,
town.
yeah, I think as we delve into each item, determining what the status is of those kayak, paddleboard racks, because it was it was owned by a private individual, but that worked through the town, and
Should we put that on our plan, our work plan?
Well, that's
That's
under
in public
public use.
access.
I just,
Public
I was
access,
just wasn't
okay.
sure what he was actually presenting.
You
us
know, the
with.
thing is, I mean, the harbor master has already developed that space over on Lake Beach. And,
Oh, right,
and then now, because of the steps, it's not able to use, but that may be the first step. And it's like, okay, you've got a canoe down on the dinghy dock,
Put it
move
on.
it over there now, and maybe just,
Lake Beach, why wouldn't you go to Steamboat? It's a land, anyway.
We,
Yeah,
is that really something we think is appropriate
think
for
so.
Lakes Beach? Is to have the beach cluttered with a whole bunch of canoes
I don't
and
know.
kayaks?
I don't know.
Well, I think we ought
You
to.
know,
I
but
think
that's
we should-
something Steve is already set up and
But I
he's
think
pushed.
he's managing it because Mr. McGonagall, I don't know who this chap is, was pushing it. And then he, for whatever reason, walked away or something, and now the town's, but I don't know that the town ever said, we think this is a good idea. He was trying to do it as a commercial, I'm gonna put a rack in and rent it. And
Yeah.
so that's where I'd like us to step back and say, wait a
So-
minute.
yeah.
And-
Did we think this was a good idea? I would say no. Lake Beach is the worst place for that.
And that's where you get
On a safety
into,
basis, on nothing else.
you get into policy and harbor management. And what's the balance there? I know, you know, Steve is trying to manage the harbor, and this is a solution he's come up with through managing the harbor. So,
But it's not proactive, it was reactive. And I think we have an opportunity now to say,
well,
what's the overview and make some recommendations.
yep. So let's look at it.
I'm gonna keep saying it, we need to
Yeah,
focus on what we want the harbor to look like.
yeah.
I mean, we really do, you know, aesthetically and function-wise, everything else. Creating more space, I don't believe is the answer.
Josh, I would like to work with you on the agreements.
Okay, excellent.
You're open to that.
Reluctantly, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, you see?
happy to delve into it.
And there are people missing. We should be making assignments willy-nilly. That's what happens when you miss a
When
meeting.
you miss a meeting.
You get,
There's what, one person missing, right?
And that person has not attended twice consecutive?
Well, and you know what? That brings up another point, attendance. You know, and maybe we ought to
Keep
create
attendance.
Oh,
some sort of
absolutely.
attendance policy. And, you know, if you're not part of the meeting and you're not involved, move on.
yeah, there were 32 people who wanted to be
Yeah,
on this
yeah.
committee.
We've got two alternates with a perfect attendance record.
And as a matter of order,
I mean,
I think it might be appropriate at the beginning of each meeting to identify the regular members.
I'm gonna try to get back.
In attendance and
Big trip of the
designate
year.
alternates
Liz
as
does that.
appropriate.
Liz does that already. She takes attendance of who's here.
I think it should be reported as part of the meeting.
Well, it is. I mean, that's part of the minutes.
Yeah, okay, but I think it should be.
part of the minutes.
articulated.
Who's here and
I
who
don't think
isn't.
it doesn't say not attending. Just
Right.
Absent, should say absent.
That's right. I think that's
You
what
could
I'm
say
saying.
absent,
We
yeah, I
should be
agree.
declaring it.
Yeah.
Absent this morning
When
is
you make your initial introduction at the beginning of the meeting, you could
quorum.
Somewhere in the committee
Well,
guidelines.
that's Liz. I mean, Liz does that when she writes up the minutes.
and we vote to accept the minutes.
Yes. And I don't know if she did that last time, actually, but,
But getting a visual tick sheet, like we do for a nonprofit board, you gotta hit 90% or it's the board.
right, here we are, members present. You know, that's how she starts the meeting.
Then there should be another line, members absent.
Select board liaison, staff, public,
Does someone have the ability to call in if they
absent.
can't?
Yes, well,
That is that possible?
that is done
Okay.
commonly. We don't have that here today.
Oh, okay.
But we could
Yeah,
coordinate
well,
with Liz
I may
perhaps.
talk to Liz, I'll go up and talk to her now about my calling in next meeting.
Board meeting, our board meetings.
Yeah, usually.
Calling it
Participating
as
by
a,
phone is usually.
I could, I'll have the time available. We're taking off on a sailing trip, and I think we'll be back by the 10th, but, you know, perhaps not. And so I was thinking if I couldn't make it, I could certainly call in.
speakerphone.
Yeah.
Our next meeting is when?
Can you spare this, Kathy?
August
I
10th.
made a second copy, so yeah, by
Bring
accident.
an iPad and put me up here on FaceTime.
There you go.
August 7th.
Oh, it's August 7th? Yeah, it probably won't be, because we're going to be on August 4th and 5th out in Blue Hill.
Okay.
10th is a Saturday.
Harbor Committee, 7:30. So excited.
All right, I'll talk to
Just want
Liz
everyone
about trying
know
to set
I'm
up,
happy to get more shirts for the
call
uniform.
in, because I can easily do that.
Okay, all right. So, Josh, how do we get started?
Well, why don't we finalize the work plan, so that we know what that is, and then,
You know what I'd like, Marcus, you should.
Oh, meeting's adjourned. Shut up.
We have,
I guess we should get a copy of.
All right, thank you very much.
That'd be nice to read through them. I have the current agreements for all the day sailors and all the wind jammers.
I got this online.
Read through those.
And
Would we expect to see
I
differences
just
there?
Googled it.
I guess that'd be interesting to know if there
Yeah.
are
It
differences.
would be interesting.
Or if it
It
is
would be
a,
because, for example, like me, Windjammer Cruises has the
and
second
then all the
boat
fees and all that, you just right off the website.
aspect
November
to it,
1st,
to their Windjammer
2018.
license.
The fee schedule I got
Make
from
sure I said
Liz.
that right. I'll have to check. It's, because they have a day sailor license and a Windjammer license.
Yeah, I don't have any of that.
So I think we should, I think we should look at it and just see what they, and the applications.
Just because I'm sat
Not
in
just
Google
the
looking
agreements.
for the fees and I couldn't find it on
Ben
the website.
Ellison's
Well, not quickly,
applications.
Yeah.
so.
for the current
Yeah, for the
licenses?
current licensees, yep.
I'll talk
Well,
to Liz about that.
Certainly
Can
helps
you-
if
okay.
there's gonna be things that we're discussing, that we have some, we have information that we need in order to